A 7-man panel of the Supreme Court led by Justice John Okoro in a unanimous ruling granted an interim injunction restraining the federal government and the Central Bank of Nigeria, including the commercial banks and the likes, from implementing the February 10 deadline for the old 200, 500 and 1,000 naira notes to stop being a legal tender. The court further held that the federal government, CBN and commercial banks must not continue with the deadline pending the determination of a notice in respect of the issue on February 15. In a swift reaction, Nigeria's Minister for Justice and Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, asked the Supreme Court to dismiss the suit by the 3 states, arguing that the plaintiffs have equally not shown the reasonable cause of action against the defendant and that the Supreme Court lacks jurisdiction for such monetary matters. The pandemonium over the February 10 deadline for the validity of 3 old naira notes assumed another dimension as 5 political parties and 3 state governments began legal battles, whilst the Kaduna, Kogi and Zamfara governments dragged the federal government before the Supreme Court, seeking an extension to the February 10 deadline. 5 political parties took the matter to the Federal Capital Territory High Court and secured an order barring the federal government and the Apex Bank from an extension of the deadline. So this morning we're being joined by a constitutional lawyer and public affairs analyst. He will be talking to us. His name is Liborous Oshoma, and he will be bringing some legal and of course vital illumination to the discussion this morning. Thank you so much, Liborous, for joining us.
Thank you, Lekan.
All right, now 3 states obtained a restraining order against the federal government and the CBN from sticking to February 10 as a deadline for the use of the old notes. Do you support the Supreme Court's ruling?
That's what courts worldwide do. When there is a dispute before them and time is of the essence, they preserve the rest before the dispute is heard on its merit. So what the Supreme Court simply have done is to say, look, let's preserve the rest, let's preserve the subject matter pending arguments on all sides. So that's what courts do world over. So the court had not ruled on the matter. The court just simply said, parties, you know what, guys, just please don't take any action. Wait, let's hear all parties. Come on the 15th, let's hear all parties before you can take further action on it. Because if the court had not done that, what that would mean would have been by on the 15th, the tenure for the implementation of the policy would have lapsed, and it would just be an academic exercise for the court. The court would now force on itself, a state of helplessness. The court would have tied its own hands even before taking the matter. So that's what court world over do. What they do is to preserve the pen before you begin to look at what led the snake into the pen. So it is it's not a question of whether supporting or not. But also, I must quickly also say here that the Attorney General have filed a preliminary objection, like you said, challenging the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court to hear the matter. Also, that will be argued because the other parties will join issue. But I would want to advise at this stage that being a matter that affects every Nigerian for and against, it will also be proper for the Supreme Court to join all the Attorney Generals of the states in the matter so that the Supreme Court can deal with it once and for all. So that not after these 3 states had argued, and then tomorrow another 3 states or 4 or 5 states will come into the matter. And lastly, now that the Supreme Court is seized of the matter, I think that matter before the Federal High Court or the FCT High Court just merely becomes an academic exercise.
But then what do you think the implication will now be on the Apex Bank's latest policy measure? What it is hoping to do is, according to reports, to prevent vote buying, to scale up the conversation and activities around conversations around cashless policy and the likes. So don't you think this is a dent on what the CBN is hoping to achieve?
I think the CBN also, now that you want us to go into the conversation, the CBN also did not interrogate the policy properly before using a fire brigade approach to migrate into a policy that you do not know its depth as fantastic as the policy is, it is not something you do with a fire brigade approach. First and foremost, let's ask the basic question. You want to migrate everybody from a cash economy to a cashless economy. What is the bandwidth of your banks? You know, how many hits can the bank application take per day? You know, don't you think there's need for expansion of those bandwidths also to accommodate the number of hits that are going to come on board? You know, what is the availability of the cash that you have also injected into the economy? You mop up 2 trillion, allegedly mop up 2 trillion, and then you release on the allegation that most of the money are outside the banking sector, and you release 300 billion. The bank on their own will hoard.
Okay, I think we just lost connection with Liborous Oshoma there, but then we will try to re-engage him to have him tell us what he thinks about this implementation and how it would affect the central bank's policy. Well, he has said that it's a bit shoddy, and that actually echoes the stance of so many people talking about the implementation, but we'll still dwell on the implementation proper and how the central bank should have done it better than the way it is being done now. So what we're going to do is to quickly go on a short break, and when we return, we'll try to reestablish connection with Liborous and see what he thinks about how the CBN has gone about implementing the Naira redesign, even the currency swap, as the case may be. We'll go on a break and we'll be back. And I'm glad that we are able to bring Liborous Oshoma back on the platform to continue what he was actually saying about how this latest court ruling by the Supreme Court is affecting or will affect the policy statement of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Liborous, thank you so much. So can you go ahead and tell us what you think this implication will be?
Yeah, so like I was saying, I think the Central Bank did not think through the long-term implication of all of this before it put a definite timeline on it. Nobody is saying that the policy is bad. Nobody is saying the central bank does not have the power to introduce a currency redesign policy. What people are basically saying is that you need to interrogate the process, and it should be a long-term thing and not a short-term thing the way the CBN has done or the way the federal government is always used to doing, both with the NIMC, the BVN, and even with the SIM card registration. Look at the attendants suffering and then the riots and the protests that they had sparked across board, and then also some banks having to shut down or most of the bank apps not working. So when you put all of this, you know, you place this vis-a-vis the economic challenges we're already facing, the attendant hardship, you know, would be, you know, something that would be unimaginable. I think it is to that extent that the governors are saying that even though it is a matter within the exclusive legislative list of the federal government, and the federal government solely has responsibility to do that, but the effect of the administration of that policy, you know, on the people, they also have a responsibility to also question it and ask for an extension of it. And so it is that effect that we are discussing here now. It is that effect that the bank is now, the Supreme Court is called to question, to determine whether that effect on the people, whether it should be blanket, a policy that will affect whose consequences will be grave on the people, whether that policy should be allowed to continue, you know, given the time band that the central bank has set. And you also notice that this will affect the market, you know, creditably, negatively. Because if you look at, let's begin to even assess the GDP of the economy after all of this. People can't sell goods now. A lot of people also that are outside the banking system, especially in the hinterland, also cannot release goods to customers until alerts are received. And in some cases, alerts, because of the pressure on the banking internet software, alerts do not come as at when due. So all of these have had cost to make a transfer right there and then. I made a transfer and the person did not even receive the money in his account until the next day. So you now begin to, when you imagine the consequences on businesses and transactions. So what it means is that we need time to migrate. The two currencies should go pari passu instead of insisting that the two currencies, one currency must go and give weight for the other one.
All right, Liborous, I'll still come back to that, but then let me quickly touch down on this. What do you think? These are the
consequences, really, and that is.
Okay, so what do you think would become of the Supreme Court's judgment if the president decides to invoke an executive order, sign an executive order to ensure that the deadline stays?
No, this president cannot do that. Even an executive order can be invalidated by the Supreme Court. You remember executive order number 10 that was signed into law by the president. The Supreme Court simply heard that executive order was contrary to the provisions of the Constitution and invalidated it. So that led to the death of the executive order. So those that are advising the president to invoke his power via an executive order do not really understand, the provisions of the law. Nobody is questioning the powers of the government, the federal government, enshrined in the exclusive legislative list of the 1999 Constitution as amended. You cannot, via an executive order, insist on a timeline for doing an action when the court is already seized of the fact of the matter. What this executive would have done is that there are no respecter of the pronouncement of the court, and that the consequences of it will be very grave for the executive. Now, what the court simply did, the court did not invalidate, the court did not grant the state the powers to say, look, what you have done is right. What the court simply did is to say, stay action on this your deadline until both parties will come and look into it. If the president now decides, while the matter is pending before the courts, now decides to go contrary to that order by invoking the powers, the presidential power order, by using an executive order, what that would mean would be that the president is no respecter of the laws of the land that he swore to protect. That the president also does not have respect for an arm of the government, an arm of government that is statutorily empowered to look into adjudication when there is a dispute. So that is not a way out of it. And then also, I must say this, which is very instructive. The deadline cannot be sacrosanct. The deadline for doing a thing, the government has also not shown that it will suffer undue hardship if that deadline is extended. The government needs to show that there are consequences if the deadline is extended. What are these consequences? What will the government suffer if the deadline is extended to now warrant twisting an arm of government or frustrating an arm of government who is adjudicating over a matter that they submitted to it? There is nothing. They came with BVN and said deadline is sacrosanct. At the end of the day, even at the expiration of the deadline, people still go open an account today and register for BVN. The same thing, they came with SIM card registration and said deadline is sacrosanct. But today, people still buy new SIM card and they register the SIM card. The same thing they came with NIMSI. Yes. I said deadline is sacrosanct. Today, don't people go to register for NIMSI without problem? Even the World Bank has also pleaded for an extension because of the economic hardship on the everyday man. Policies are meant for people and not the people for policy. So that is not sacrosanct.
We cannot overemphasize the hardship that Nigerians are going through as a result of this policy. But you would know that for some days now, some bank managers were being arrested for hoarding these new Naira notes and selling it to the highest bidder. And some financial analysts are saying that it is the banks that should be held responsible largely for this anomaly that we're experiencing as of now. So what do you think? What do you think that means?
No. Let's look at it from the microeconomic level. When something is scarce, it gives room for hoarding. It gives room for manipulation. In the first place, what led to the hoarding? Let's look at the figures. CBN said it has mopped up 2 trillion of old notes. and then you release 300 billion of new notes. So it means that there is a shortfall of 1.7 trillion of the new note. Let's even assume that you release 1 trillion after mopping up. So because there is a lacuna, there is an opportunity for hoarding, the banks also are cashing in on that to hoard some of this currency, either for their high-end customers or also to make quick bucks and quick business out of this thing. Yeah, why dealing with the banks who are hoarding this currency? Also, the CBN should be questioned, because what the CBN is doing that nobody is focusing attention on is mopping up cash liquidity. The CBN is mopping up cash liquidity and blaming the banks. Yes, the banks have their share of blames by holding up for their high-end customers, and then also some unscrupulous ones wanting to make quick business by selling the new note because it is not available. It is when something, when supply is low and demand is high, definitely prices will go up. It is macroeconomics. So at that point, people are going to make money from this business because you have made it scarce. The CBN also does not understand the volume of everyday cash transaction that takes place in Nigeria. That's why all of this crisis is there. And then lastly, we talk about vote buying. You want to restrict vote buying. Since when has it become the policy of the federal, of the CBN to begin to conduct restrict corruption in election? There are laws, there are instant laws, there are instant provisions embedded in the Electoral Act that would empower the federal government to deal with election manipulators. Okay. There are Anti-Money Laundering Act also embedded in our Anti-Money Laundering Act that empower the EFCC to deal with people who are, round tripping the naira or carrying such currency. We have not even implemented those instant provisions of our laws. And then you introduce a policy as good as the policy is, but you also, the people you say you want to punish, you end up punishing majority of the people. The politicians can always afford to get money, more money, because they have more.
All right,
they can even decide to use dollars to buy votes.
Liborous, to quickly round this up, what do you think the consequences will be if the federal government goes ahead to not obey this court ruling? Quickly, just about a minute or two.
The consequences we're already seeing. We showed a video of some bank officials in Warri, having to scale fences. You show video of people burning tires, frustration on the street over this action. The consequences will be that a lot of people, the everyday person, will not have access to cash and will be frustrated and will take out their anger and their grievance on the society. And once that happens, people are already saying that this is intentional to ensure that election does not hold. And once that happens, you can't hold election in an unsafe society, in a society that is in an unrest mood. Even the INEC has said, well, we need cash for operation. Let me quickly round up by saying that, take, for example, that gatesman, that everyday market woman who does not have social security nets, who does not have a means to borrow, and whose salary is not enough, who rely on 1,000 naira, 200 naira, 500 naira tips from you and I. There is no cash to give them to support whatever they are doing as a social security net. Okay. So what becomes of it? Those people take out the grievance on the society, and the effects would be unimaginable.
All right, thank you so much, Liborous, for joining us on this conversation. But I don't give tips. I don't know if you do, but then it's a robust conversation.
I give tips.
All right, this is a robust conversation that we've had this morning, and we hope that the Central Bank of Nigeria will be able to go back to the drawing board, of course, with the federal government, to see what they can do to ameliorate the plight of Nigerians who are going through hardship at this particular time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.